reading from 2 Corinthians, the 5th chapter. So we are ambassadors for Christ. Since God is making his appeal through us, we entreat you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. As we work together with him, we urge you also not to accept the grace of God in vain. For he says, "At an acceptable time I have listened to you, and on a day of salvation I have helped you." See, now is the acceptable time. See, now is the day of salvation. We are putting no obstacle in anyone's way, so that no fault may be found with our ministry. But as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way, through great endurance, in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger.
By purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and the power of God. With weapons of righteousness for the right hand and for the left, in honor and dishonor, in ill repute and good repute. We are treated as impostors, and yet are true, as unknown, and yet are well known, as dying and see we are alive, as punished and yet not killed, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor yet making many rich, as having nothing and yet possessing everything.
Well, hello everyone. I am Pastor Neal Cannon.
Pastor Micah Pearson, and it is so good to see you today on this Ash Wednesday, our first session out of our next 6 weeks in Lent.
You know, it doesn't feel necessarily like a very hopeful time. I don't know if you feel very hopeful all the time, Pastor Micah. You're a pretty hopeful guy. You're pretty positive.
I do
But it doesn't
look at the glass half full. I am an
It's always half
I'm an
full.
eternal optimist. There's good to come out of this yet.
You are. I've noticed that. So this time of Ash Wednesday, we thought, like I said, we thought it would be particularly interesting to talk about hope, because Ash Wednesday is a time that it's a time in the church that we remember death, right? And it also marks our journey towards the cross, right? So, you know, as we all know, Ash Wednesday is the time of year where we take ashes from the palms, generally, that were burned, that were used from the previous year's Palm Sunday, and you mark the sign of the cross with these ashes, and you put them on your forehead, and you say, Pastor Micah, you are a child of God, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And we repeat these words every year as a remembrance of this really kind of difficult time. But it also, and Pastor Micah, you can maybe speak to this too, it also is a hopeful symbol. It's not just a remembrance of death.
Yeah, I mean, we're journeying towards the cross, and what happens out of the cross, new life begins. And today we're going to talk about what does that hope look like, specifically from the text from our Corinthians passage. Where do you find hope amidst this time, amidst this passage, and how does this lens, this scriptural lens, guide us in this process of finding hope? That's what I would like to talk about, of where does hope come from in this time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and we've titled our joint kind of sermon today, "Hope Rises," and it does rise in Ash Wednesday. You know, particularly in this text. You know, some of the things that kind of stood out to me were coming from verse 4 there, right? It says, "But as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way." And then it says, "Through great endurance in afflictions, hardships, calamities," right? Is this starting to feel familiar with kind of the time we're living through right now? Like afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger. Like Paul is kind of diving into this situation, which of course is particular to the early Christians, but still has meaning for us today, particularly on this Ash Wednesday, because this Ash Wednesday marks a time where it's almost been a full calendar year where we have kind of been, isolated in this time of COVID, where we've been, struggling. We miss our families. We miss our, people miss their grandkids, their grandparents, their mothers and fathers. And so it's been a time of struggle for sure for many, and if not most, if not all, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it's and Paul writes it really eloquently. He says there are sleepless nights. And the question that I wonder about is, what keeps you up at night? What are you worried about? What are you anxious about? What are you so looking forward to doing once this time of isolation and distancing, social distancing, physical distancing, all the distancing ends? Um, I know that we all face this tragedy, this calamity, independently, which has been really hard. I'm grateful for our online community, for the chances we have had, but it seems like this is a calamity that we're all grieving collectively about, and facing different difficulties, no matter where we are in the span of life. I mean, I think of our son and daughter, Bergen and Sana, and how they don't get to play with other kids. I think of my all the way up to my grandmother, who's 94, who we haven't seen since COVID started, and we miss her dearly. And the loss of that family connection and community is just really painful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think though, and in the midst of that, I think there are all sorts of examples of hope and, just goodness that kind of rise out of the midst of these, our personal struggles, but also even our national struggles, right? Like, personally, yeah, I see a lot of hope in the community that is formed, at Wood Lake. Like our online community is a great time. It's not perfect, right? Like we'd much rather be together, I'd much rather, see people and shake people's hands again and give people hugs, and all the things we're kind of used to doing. But it is like, in the midst of kind of our struggles and in the midst of this, our online community can be a little beacon of hope and a little bit of light, in the midst of an otherwise difficult situation. And I see us, when we read these words, I read, by purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirits, genuine love.
That's where hope rises.
Yeah.
Repeat that again, because that's where this kind of hope bubbles up for Paul. And I think for those early Christians that were facing all of these, I mean, imprisonment, killing, death, all these just deeply fearful things, we face them in different ways, but hope rises up from this. And if you want to read that, just the line where hope rises.
Right there. Yeah, absolutely. It says by purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and the power of God. Right? Like it's just such a beautiful image that Paul juxtaposes with, these kind of the calamity. And it fits perfectly with our Ash Wednesday theme, right? Because like in the midst, we say that, Ash Wednesday marks the beginning of Jesus's journey towards the cross, right? Which is a brutal death. But of course, in the church, it's also an incredible sign of hope because the story doesn't end with the cross. The story ends with Jesus's resurrection. And so kind of, it's a beautiful image, I think, to begin our conversation of hope around Ash Wednesday, because it just is it's the perfect image of saying, yes, we're going through this difficult time and it's still going to be difficult in the coming months, but there's this beautiful image of hope rising kind of in the middle of it, which I think is helpful for us as we move forward.
Yeah, and that Paul concludes by saying, this is the Christian community. We are not quite there yet. We have a lot of work to do. And we see that out in the community, all of the pain, the injustice, the suffering that people are facing. And we, as Christians, get to be a part of making our community whole again, breathing peace into war-torn areas, breathing healing into sick places, breathing patience into anxiety filled places, breathing life into death. And we do that through God's hope. We can't do it on our own. We need God's hope. We need this sense of who God is and what God is doing in our world. And I think that we always have to go back to that. And Ash Wednesday is the perfect place to start with this journey of hope. So as you take your ashes today, if you have ashes, if you don't have ashes, just use your thumb and trace a cross on your forehead and say, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Remember where you came and to where you will return. You are a child of God.
Amen.